From the Basement, the only blockchain podcast that interviews the forgotten and downtrodden developers that actually do the work. Hosted by me, Martin G. Today we got Clemens Wan here. Hi Clemens.
Hi.
And for those of you who don't know, Clemens worked for R3 for 2 years before joining Consensys, which is run by Joe Lublin. And he's one of the 5 creators of Ethereum, alongside Vitalik. And Consensys is arguably the biggest Ethereum product and consulting house in the world. Meaning that Clemens has got first-hand experience of writing both Corda and Ethereum applications for industry customers. So we're going to find out why he left R3 to join Consensys, why anyone would choose Ethereum to write financial services applications after having used Corda, and whether he sees the two technologies converging in the future or moving further apart. But first, let's get to know him a bit better. Clemens, I've got my notes here from my last conversation. In a nutshell, that you currently work for a Consensys as a solutions architect, which means that you're explaining technical details about Consensys products to prospective existing customers. You first started programming when you were in high school, or 14, writing funny little animations using BASIC. Your nickname is Clembot, which you got from your days at R3. See, Corda people do have more fun. You grew up in Long Island, New York, and there you went to a free tuition school called Cooper Union, where you studied electronic engineering. They did many free courses, so you took as many as you could, learning to program. You first started working in software when you were still at Cooper Union University for a startup building a proto-Reddit data sharing web tool for universities. You spent the first 6 years of your career in financial markets at Credit Suisse, and then the last 5 years in blockchain digital assets for R3 and then Consensys. Your operating system of choice is Windows. Your programming language of choice is Solidity. Unfortunately, the last time you wrote any code was about a month ago, when you did a little bit of experimentation on time lock contracts. You like to listen to the YouTube channel Best of the Voice whilst coding because you like the short covers they do. The two most important skills for a programmer to have are documentation and writing test cases. You basically think Agile with a small a is a helpful way to get things done, and you got into crypto pretty early on, and you own some Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, and Doggy, or Dogecoin, to name but a few. Right. Can you give me some background about what you were doing at R3?
Sure. Yeah, I can kind of give a quick background. So when I joined R3 from Credit Suisse, R3 had a great initial vision. They actually did a bunch of interviews with the early members, and I was on most of those calls within Credit Suisse, listening to their vision, kind of trying to leverage blockchain to disrupt the industry. And from there, when I ultimately moved over around January of 2016, I was part of the Lab and Research Center. And so that took the initial 42 members and tried to add value to the whole ecosystem. So the goal of that membership was to be a consortium, to execute as many projects as possible. And at the time, it was actually kind of funny. We called it the proof of press release, because the idea behind these projects was to get 1 or 2 developers from multiple parties, have them join, build out the project paper, the final paper associated with it, and then essentially, if you were just one developer in one innovation group in your bank, you can actually work with other like-minded developers across those banks, and they could be competitors as well. And so the real value behind the Lab and Research Center, and I love the idea of having this open membership of kind of like a gym model, but also kind of like a fraternity model where everyone really learned as much as they could and then brought it back into their organization to form their own community and larger team around it.
So, as someone who's pretty much thrown their lot in with R3, Corda's going to be the horse I back. And I'm just going to solely focus on Corda. I look at what they do and how Corda apps seem to be so well designed for financial services, use in financial services, I can't really imagine why you would use anything else. Certainly not why you would use a public ledger based DLT system to try and do financial services with.
Yeah, so one of the hardest parts about and Corda, I still love it. I think it still has a lot of great potential. I think it's still growing quite quickly. The hard part is within the permission network, there's and I do some studies around what is the total cost of ownership of this new application, and how do you actually sell the application, and how do you actually guarantee that the network that's created isn't really breaking any laws around antitrust, or that it's actually fair, and there's a lot of rules and regulations around this. And so the hard part is really forming the network. And I think the Corda Foundation that was put together has a lot of shared services. But when you add on all the costs, it seems like, and kind of the good part, sorry for jumping around, but kind of the good part is that Corda does have a great network of banks that have signed up and that have a long history with them and that have some levels of licenses. But each individual bank also is aware of vendor lock-in, and they don't want to have these dedicated servers that can only be used for Corda. I mean, they will have to, but they will have to pretty much have a fairly large footprint. And if you take Corda for the components and for the design that it was created for, I think of them as transaction chains. So within the flow framework, you're jumping from party to party to sign the set of transactions, and then you send to the notary, and then your executed change of your states will then be saved at the parties that are need to know. And so those transaction chains, as part of these flows, are very, very powerful, but it's really just an upgraded pub sub model using AMQP, MQ messaging. And then the hard part is, in terms of recovery, then you'll have to recover from peers, then you'll have to, the recovery mechanism, yes, you can recover from an observer and all these other aspects, but it's not a single ledger, and it's certainly not kind of like open accounts where anyone can join and control and send transactions to anywhere and it be processed overall. So when I think about the Ethereum ecosystem, I think about a live battle tested public space that has a lot of potential in borrowing those design patterns for enterprise types of applications. So I'm very bullish on really interesting native DeFi models that could be fairly interesting structured products in the enterprise world. And the code is out there, right? The code is currently being tested constantly. People are forking Uniswap for SushiSwap and all these other interesting things. And I like the idea of not having to worry about the infrastructure as much and focusing much more on the potential of using the building blocks of these smart contract protocols.
Why did you leave R3 then? I mean, is that was that a vote of confidence, in Ethereum over Corda in some way, or?
It was mostly for different opportunities. I wanted to own a product. I wanted to be a lead architect, maybe CTO for a product, and I saw a few opportunities of ideas that I don't think would have been great core apps, but probably would have been great, dApps on Ethereum. And so it was a natural progression. I actually left on quite great terms with the R3 team. I consider most of them still my friends now, and I contact them often. So I think it was a career path choice, but even when I joined Consensys, I stayed very close to Corda and tried to figure out how we can do interoperability between Corda and Ethereum. Published a few blog posts about how the architectures are very, very different, but could be useful, from a macro perspective of one might focus on the actual enterprise requirements, non-functional requirements to get it installed within financial service banks, and the other one could be more interesting patterns for open cash, for open e-money.
Do you think that do you think Corda and Ethereum might be connected in the future in some way, or do you think one might run on the other?
It's possible. So the great thing about Corda is that you can build Bitcoin and you can build Ethereum on Corda if you wanted to. It's just that you would need to convince other people to run nodes, and then you would have to somehow open it up to be permissionless. Corda has been built to be composable and has been built to allow for choices for, if I'm the enterprise, I want full control of what I install on my application, on how to update it, how to maintain it, how to build my own monitoring, and I want to be responsible for that. So that's kind of the difference is, they may work together in the future, but you can't really force one entire central bank or one entire industry to choose one over the other. They likely will pick one over the other in some sense, but they'll end up being some type of trusted API endpoint, and then it'll look like any type of network to network connection.
With Corda, you can kind of split it up into two different levels, right? You've got the kind of a Corda DLT system, of nodes, flows, states, and contracts, which is open source, and then you've got the R3 Corda network, the kind of Corda mainnet, so to speak, which they want you to deploy your Corda apps onto. Although you can actually set up private networks and deploy your Corda app onto that instead if you want to. But that would seem to beg the question: well, will there ever be another provider of a Corda network? Do you think? Can you see there ever being like a Consensys Corda network that would that would stand alongside and be a separate offering to the R3 Corda network?
I mean, I could see more of existing payment networks looking to leverage it for communication across their networks. One of the value propositions of Corda is if everyone's running a Corda node and that's all set up, then essentially you're doing database to database comms and reconciliation fairly quickly, and then you have the evidence in that transaction chain of those states. That's fairly powerful because you're connecting them together. But if you already know everyone within the network, and I think we've seen this with Finastra and their Fusion LenderCom offering, is that the target was you have a existing large software provider that's been the golden source of any type of loans within a bank for the past 50 years, and you augment it so that it has a connecting point between their installations. And so the interesting part is that LoanIQ, which would Mises, which became Finastra, LoanIQ has basically been installed and has probably 40 to 50% market share across all the banks. As they augment their version of it to be able to focus on deployment, Corda becomes a deployment mechanism of traditional software, rather than thinking of it as, well, this is a new DLT paradigm where you can build Corda apps and build your own disruptive software. I think the opportunity now is for existing incumbents, large software companies, to build augmentations of their existing software to have a Corda node, connect those Corda nodes together, have identities with parties, and then be able to communicate between their existing installations and hopefully still keep their front end, right? This is all just database communication technology.
Well, and then just get the benefits of a reduced cost of running.
Well, it would just be the benefit of updating their versioning much faster. So if I'm able to use a Corda flow as a method of deploying that Corda app, then that could be pretty powerful as just like a enterprise-grade notification system of when I should upgrade to the latest version. And the Corda app package itself, your state could just be, a bin tray type of distribution.
What direction do you see both companies going in, and how do you see them? Where do you see the platforms developing?
I think this is kind of a bigger question about what's the appetite of the market and where's the market going. And I don't want to go into kind of like post-COVID world. So just in general, I think the trends outside are around central bank digital currencies, preparing for some type of institutional readiness when there is a token out there of some sort, and then it's kind of issued from M0 money. How does me as an enterprise treat that, and how can I use that for internal use cases to do some type of liquidity management? There are exchanges out there that are now more traditional exchanges augmenting over into accepting digital currencies or having links into digital currencies. So hopefully the API links don't really change too much with that. And then OCC also provided some guidance in having institutional custody of digital currencies. So banks now have the ability to hold digital currencies if they want to. And so with all of these small changes adds up to kind of the ball is back in the bank's court and saying, well, what will you do? For example, when everyone had a mobile app and everyone was able to take advantage of taking photos with that mobile app, you saw kind of the early days of being able to cash your check through those photos, and then all the encryption and all of the work that happened for each of the retail banks to do that. I think similarly, there will be some level of institutional custody, some level of surfacing this technology so that it's useful for liquidity management. And that's going to be led by kind of these large moving forces like central bank digital currency and payment operators like MasterCard, Visa, and PayPal kind of leveraging their identity network. So a lot of this is pushing towards companies being more product focused and then trying to focus on a business case that enables them to connect the markets together. Within Consensys, we're certainly evolved into a software company rather than a venture studio.
That's great. I think that's about all we've got time for, Clemens. What a
Yep,
pleasure.
no problem. Thanks for asking all these great questions.
Good luck with everything at Consensys, Clemens. And really looking forward to finding out what your next big adventure is.
Okay, cheers. Bye.
Thanks for listening. You can follow me on Twitter to catch future episodes, and all previous episodes can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. This show was made by me, Martin G, and Oscar Bear Contents Bennett, and was recorded live from the basement.